I just did this essay today. I did add a couple of sections on Spinoza's as complementary, right, to American covenantalism. And the whole point is like, sorry, there's a car outside. The whole point is like, as the title says, right, is the American covenant true or imaginary? Is it ideology or is it rooted in reality, so to say, right? And so anyway, it's called the American Covenant, True or Imaginary Ideology, a Spinoza Critique, a Lockean Defense, and the Case for Covenantal Realism. 1. Spinoza's God and the Contingency of Human Covenants. Now, I'm not an expert on Spinoza, right, but that was like reading some books. Like one is the Let There Be Enlightenment. It's by Matheson and Edelstein. Goes over the religious grammar and roots of enlightenment, right? That is not it's not just all secularism and skepticism, basically. I have other books on the Enlightenment as well. I was reading parts of that one, and then I watched an hour-long video on Spinoza. He believes like in God, right? But he also believes in covenant, but from a secular point of view, right? But I feel like even he calls it a genius idea, right? And so I say that God and covenant is a far more superior foundation for America than moral skepticism or secular humanism, because you want ideas that enforce, not deteriorate, the American values and foundation, right? And God and covenant fits that perfectly. Like, it did add a couple of sections kind of going over, like, it can be used as a bridge between secularist and religious, right? The idea of the covenant. But let me just continue. Spinoza conceives of God as identical with nature, impersonal, non-providential, without will, intention, or covenantal purpose. From this standpoint, covenants are merely human constructs, ingenious tools for social order, but lacking transcendent grounding. They survive only if humans behave as if there is accountability, duty, and moral reality. But this is precisely Spinoza's internal contradiction. His system requires moral authority to exist, yet denies its ontological foundation. He praises the Hebrew covenant as a brilliant political system, while simultaneously draining it of divine force. A covenant that binds no one beyond human will is not a covenant in the biblical sense. It is a contract whose power evaporates the moment belief in its moral ground is withdrawn. Spinoza's framework is elegant but hollow. It cleverly rationalizes covenantal order, yet cannot justify moral obligation, rights, or justice. 2. Human covenants imply God, even in Spinoza. Covenants cannot operate in a purely imaginary space. For a covenant to function, humans must assume moral obligation is real, promises bind the conscience, authority is not merely preference, justice is not a social fiction. Even with Spinoza's universe, a covenant presupposes what Spinoza denies, a real ground for obligation. Humans cannot sustain covenantal order without believing in something higher than themselves. This is why secular interpretations inevitably collapse into relativism or voluntarism. They cannot explain why anyone is obligated beyond convenience. In this way, the very functioning of human covenants points beyond Spinoza's abstraction to the biblical God, a God who grounds obligation, conscience, and natural right. Common sense. 3. Common sense realism, Locke, and moral necessity. Common sense realism, foundational to Scottish Enlightenment, taught and embraced by many founders, affirms that humans naturally perceive moral truths. Locke builds on this. Natural rights and duties are intelligible only under a personal God who reveals moral reality and holds humanity accountable. Jefferson, Washington, Madison, Adams, Witherspoon, and others operated within this moral theistic framework, even when their denominational or theological details differed. They rejected empiricism's demand for laboratory proof of God because moral truth is self-evident, not experimentally derived. They treated God as real because the entire moral order of liberty and natural rights collapses without him. In this sense, the founders were not secular rationalists, they were rational theists. This for the Declaration as a sacred covenant oath. The Declaration is not a secular manifesto, it is a covenantal oath, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence. This is covenant language. The signers pledge their lives, fortunes, and sacred honor under divine witness. Eleazar, Daniel Dresbach, and Mark Hall have shown that America's founding political culture was shaped profoundly by Reformed covenantalism and English dissenting Protestantism. Federalism itself is covenantal, a structure of mutual obligations distributed among levels of authority, modeled on biblical Israel, and thus the Declaration is the oath, the Constitution, the covenant's legal architecture, and federalism is practical stewardship. 5. Refuting Spinoza and secular critiques. Spinoza's model cannot sustain universal rights, moral accountability, binding justice, covenantal obligation. His system works only if people believe in moral authority, yet he denies the reality of such authority. The American founding explicitly presupposed a personal providential God, whose existence grounds natural rights, justice, and liberty. Spinoza's model is therefore insufficient for Republican life. The biblical covenant model, however, provides all the necessary elements: moral realism, obligation, accountability, and enduring rights. 6. Additional critiques. Spinoza's self-undermining framework. Spinoza reduces the covenant to human invention, which renders it fragile and morally thin. But if a covenant is merely imaginary, so are rights, duties, and justice. His own admiration for the covenant's stability contradicts his claim that covenants lack divine grounding. He attempts to keep the social effectiveness of the covenant while denying the metaphysical reality that makes covenant work. And this results is a philosophical half measure, attractive but incoherent. And 7, the other section added complementarity and versus secularism and skepticism. Here's where the modern debate often gets confused. The American covenantal tradition is not the enemy of reason. It is a condition for reason's civic expression. Secularism treats belief in a providential God as optional. Skepticism treats covenantal order as psychological projection. But covenantal political culture was never meant to be imposed by force. It was meant to bind a free people within a shared moral reality. Lockean Christianity is not hostile to dissent, pluralism, or liberty. It provides their soil. The founders rejected sectarian coercion, not deism. They rejected theocracy, not covenantal moral order. Thus, covenant realism complements reason, dissent, liberty of conscience, and pluralism, while secular reductionism cannot supply their moral ground. 8. Covenant skepticism and secularism, a bridge, not a barrier. The other section that I added. This covenantal framework can actually bridge religious and secular perspectives. Even skeptics acknowledge that societies require trust, moral authority, shared norms, accountability, justice. The covenantal model simply grounds these in something real rather than arbitrary. Secular frameworks can describe social cohesion, but they cannot justify it. Covenant theology justifies what secularism merely observes. Thus, the American covenant does not alienate skeptics, it invites them into a shared moral order that transcends individual preference without coercing belief. It is a bridge, not an imposition. 9. Can the American covenant be imaginary or ideological? If the American covenant were imaginary, its moral authority would collapse. Yet historically, the founders experienced providence, not metaphorically but personally. In the Revolution, the ratification debates, and the formation of the Constitution, they interpreted their victory, unity, and survival as evidence of divine favor, not abstractly, but in lived reality. Thus, the American covenant cannot be purely ideological. The founders acted as people who believed the God of the Declaration was real. A covenant rooted in imagination alone cannot bind a nation. Only a covenant rooted in reality can form a republic capable of enduring. And I have a conclusion, right? Spinoza provides brilliant analysis, but no foundation. Secularism provides vocabulary, but no justification. Skepticism observes social order, but cannot explain its moral force. The American covenantal tradition, rooted in Lockean Christianity, dissenting Protestantism, and the founders' lived experience of providence, provides what alternative systems cannot. Moral realism, rights grounded in divine order, obligations that bind conscience, a structure of liberty rooted in covenant. Federalism as covenantal stewardship. The American covenant is not imaginary, it is the moral architecture of the republic itself. And that's where I ended it there. And so you can let me know what you think. Yeah, if you like my videos, please like and subscribe. Thank you, and God bless.